Imagine walking through empty hospital corridors at midnight, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, your footsteps echoing in the darkness, and then you hear it. Footsteps behind you, but when you turn around, there's no one there. Welcome to the most terrifying hospitals in the United Kingdom, where the line between life and death has become permanently blurred. These aren't just abandoned buildings. They're repositories of human suffering, tragedy, and unexplained phenomena that continue to this day. Before we dive into these spine-chilling locations, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming up. And if you're brave enough to watch until the end, let us know in the comments which hospital terrified you the most. Tonight, we're counting down the top 10 haunted UK hospitals that will absolutely keep you awake at night. Let's begin. Starting our countdown at number 10, we have West Park Hospital in Surrey, a Victorian-era psychiatric institution that opened in 1924 and closed its doors in 2003. But the patients, some say they never left. This sprawling complex housed thousands of patients over its 79-year history, many of whom suffered from severe mental illnesses in an era when treatment was often more torture than therapy. The hospital's brutal methods included electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and prolonged isolation. Security guards and urban explorers report hearing screaming, echoing through the empty wards, even decades after closure. The most chilling reports come from Ward 7, the former children's psychiatric unit, where visitors claim to hear the sound of children crying and laughing in rooms that have been empty for 20 years. One security guard quit after encountering what he described as a young girl in a hospital gown who disappeared when he approached. The temperature in certain areas drops inexplicably, and electronic equipment frequently malfunctions without explanation. What makes West Park particularly unsettling is the sheer number of unexplained deaths that occurred here. Deaths that were often covered up or poorly documented, leaving families without answers and spirits without peace. At number 9, we venture into Essex to explore Severals Hospital, a psychiatric facility that operated from 1913 to 1997. This massive Victorian complex was designed to be self-sufficient, complete with its own farm, railway, and even a mortuary that saw far too much use. Severals gained a dark reputation for its experimental treatments and high mortality rate. The hospital performed numerous lobotomies and housed some of the most disturbed patients in the country. What's particularly disturbing is that many patients who entered Severals were never seen by their families again. The paranormal activity here is relentless. Visitors report seeing shadowy figures moving through the corridors, doors slamming shut on their own, and the sound of medical equipment running in rooms that have been stripped bare for decades. The morgue area is particularly active, with people reporting the overwhelming smell of formaldehyde and the sensation of being watched. One photographer captured what appears to be a figure in a white coat standing in a doorway, but no one was there when the photo was taken. Perhaps most chilling is the children's ward, where toys have been found mysteriously moved overnight, and visitors report hearing the sound of children playing games that no child should ever have to play in a place like this. The hospital's chapel, where many funeral services were held for patients who died alone, is said to be so haunted that even paranormal investigators refuse to spend the night there. Number 8 takes us to Wales and the infamous Denbigh North Wales Hospital, also known as Denbigh Asylum. Operating from 1848 to 1995, this Gothic revival building housed over 1,500 patients at its peak, many of whom were subjected to horrific treatments that would be considered torture by today's standards. The hospital's dark history includes forced sterilizations, brutal restraint methods, and a shocking number of patient deaths that were never properly investigated. The building's imposing towers and fortress-like appearance seem designed to keep secrets hidden within its walls. Paranormal investigators consistently rank Denbigh as one of the most haunted locations in the UK. The activity here is so intense that it's been featured on numerous ghost hunting shows, with teams capturing unexplained voices, shadow figures, and objects moving on their own. The most terrifying area is the former hydrotherapy room, where patients were subjected to freezing cold baths as treatment. Visitors report feeling an overwhelming sense of panic and despair in this room, with many unable to remain inside for more than a few minutes. Staff quarters on the upper floors are plagued by the sound of footsteps in the middle of the night, doors opening and closing, and the sensation of someone sitting on beds in empty rooms. One paranormal team recorded what sounds like a patient begging for help in Welsh, a recording that has never been explained. The hospital's clock tower, visible for miles around, is said to chime at odd hours, even though the clock mechanism was removed years ago. Local residents still report hearing it toll 13 times at midnight, an impossibility that has become part of local folklore. At number 7, we explore Hellingly Hospital in East Sussex, a psychiatric facility that operated from 1903 to 1994. Despite its relatively innocent name, Helingley lived up to its darker implications, housing some of the most challenging psychiatric cases in the country. The hospital was designed as a pauper lunatic asylum, and conditions were often deplorable. Overcrowding was common, with patients sleeping in corridors and treatment consisting mainly of sedation and restraint. The mortality rate was exceptionally high, with many patients dying from neglect rather than their original conditions. What makes Helingley particularly unsettling is the vast network of underground tunnels connecting different buildings. These tunnels, originally used to transport supplies and deceased patients, are now the epicenter of paranormal activity. Explorers brave enough to venture into these tunnels report hearing voices echoing from empty chambers, the sound of gurneys being wheeled through corridors, and an overwhelming feeling of being followed. The temperature in the tunnels is consistently 10 to 15 degrees colder than the surface buildings, with no scientific explanation. The former operating theater is another hotspot of activity. Visitors report seeing surgical lights turning on by themselves, the sound of medical procedures taking place, and the apparition of a surgeon who appears to be performing operations on invisible patients. Most disturbing are reports from the children's wards, where investigators have recorded what sounds like children singing nursery rhymes in empty rooms. The voices are clear enough to make out individual words, but no children have set foot in these buildings for over 30 years. One of the most documented phenomena at Helingley is the wandering patient, a figure in a hospital gown who appears throughout different areas of the complex, always walking in the same direction, never acknowledging anyone who tries to interact with them. Securing the number 6 spot is Hill Hospital in Surrey, a psychiatric institution that operated from 1883 to 1991. This Victorian-era facility was one of the largest in Europe, housing over 2,000 patients at its peak and earning a reputation as one of the most disturbing mental health facilities in the United Kingdom. Cane Hill was notorious for its experimental treatments, including early forms of electroshock therapy, insulin shock treatment, and prefrontal lobotomies. The hospital performed more lobotomies than almost any other facility in the country, with devastating results for countless patients. The paranormal activity at Cane Hill is legendary among ghost hunters. The building seems to pulse with residual energy from decades of human suffering. Visitors consistently report being touched by invisible hands, hearing conversations in empty rooms, and witnessing doors opening and closing on their own. The most haunted area is Ward 8, the former violent patients ward, where restraints and padded cells were common. The energy in this section is so oppressive that many people experience difficulty breathing and overwhelming feelings of panic and claustrophobia. One of the most chilling phenomena is the screaming corridor, a hallway where visitors report hearing blood-curdling screams that seem to come from the walls themselves. These screams have been recorded by multiple investigation teams, but no source has ever been identified. The hospital's chapel, where many funeral services were held for patients who died without family, is said to be haunted by a priest who continues to perform services for an invisible congregation. Witnesses have reported seeing candles lighting themselves and hearing organ music playing hymns for the dead. Perhaps most disturbing is the children's playground area, where the rusted swings are said to move on windless nights, pushed by the ghosts of young patients who never had the chance to experience a normal childhood. At number 5, we encounter Whittingham Hospital in Lancashire, once the largest mental hospital in Britain. Operating from 1873 to 1995, this massive complex covered over 200 acres and housed more than 3,000 patients at its peak. Whittingham's history is marred by scandal and tragedy. In the 1960s and 70s, investigations revealed widespread abuse, neglect, and suspicious deaths. Staff members were prosecuted for mistreating patients, but many believe the true extent of the horrors that occurred here has never been fully revealed. The paranormal activity at Whittingham is among the most intense documented in the UK. The sheer scale of the complex means that supernatural encounters can happen anywhere, but certain areas are particularly active. The former electroshock therapy rooms are plagued by the sound of generators running and patients screaming, even though the equipment was removed decades ago. Visitors report feeling electrical sensations and seeing bright flashes of light in these rooms. The hospital's mortuary is another hotspot, with investigators consistently recording unexplained voices and the sound of medical procedures. The temperature in the mortuary remains unnaturally cold, and electronic equipment frequently fails without explanation. Number 4 brings us to Scotland in the haunting Bangour Village Hospital in West Lothian. This facility, which operated from 1906 to 2004, was designed as a village concept with multiple buildings spread across a large estate, creating a self-contained community for patients. Originally built to treat tuberculosis patients, Bangor later became a psychiatric hospital and general medical facility. During both World Wars, it served as a military hospital, treating soldiers with shell shock and severe injuries. The combination of different types of suffering over nearly a century has created layers of paranormal activity. The hospital's unique village layout means that supernatural encounters can occur anywhere across the sprawling complex. Each building seems to have its own resident spirits, creating a community of the dead that mirrors the living community that once existed here. The most active building is Villa 5, the former psychiatric ward for violent patients. This building is so haunted that even demolition crews have reported strange occurrences. Tools go missing, electrical equipment fails, and workers report feeling watched by invisible eyes. The hospital's water tower has become infamous for unexplained lights that appear in its windows at night, despite having no electricity. Local residents regularly report seeing figures moving past the windows, as if patients are still being housed in the abandoned structure. One of the most chilling aspects of Bangor is the children's school building, where young patients received education. Teachers and caretakers report hearing children reciting lessons in empty classrooms, with chalk marks appearing on blackboards overnight. The morgue building is particularly active, with visitors experiencing overwhelming feelings of sadness and despair. Many report seeing processions of ghostly figures carrying stretchers, as if funeral services are still being conducted for the many patients who died here. What makes Bangor especially terrifying is that the paranormal activity seems to be increasing rather than diminishing over time. As nature reclaims the buildings, the spirits seem to be becoming more active, as if they're fighting against being forgotten. Claiming the number 3 position is Royds Hospital in Yorkshire, a psychiatric facility that operated from 1888 to 2003. This Victorian institution was known for its innovative architecture, but also for its disturbing treatment methods and exceptionally high mortality rate. Royds housed over 2,000 patients at its peak, many of whom were committed by families who wanted them forgotten. The hospital's records show thousands of deaths, many under suspicious circumstances, with patients often buried in unmarked graves in the hospital cemetery. The paranormal activity at Royds is so intense that it's attracted paranormal investigators from around the world. The building seems to retain the psychic imprint of decades of human suffering, creating a supernatural atmosphere that's impossible to ignore. The most haunted area is the former admission ward, where new patients were processed and often sedated against their will. Visitors report hearing screaming and pleading voices, as if the admission process is still taking place with invisible patients. The hospital's ballroom, where patients were sometimes forced to participate in recreational activities, is haunted by the sound of music and dancing. Witnesses have reported seeing couples waltzing in the empty room, only to have them vanish when approached. One of the most documented phenomena is the White Lady, a figure believed to be a former nurse who appears throughout the hospital, often seeming to comfort invisible patients. She's been photographed multiple times, always appearing as a translucent figure in a vintage nursing uniform. The hospital's chapel is said to be one of the most spiritually active locations in the UK. Visitors report seeing pews filled with ghostly congregants during invisible services, with the sound of hymns being sung by voices that seem to come from beyond the grave. Perhaps most disturbing is the electroshock therapy room, where investigators have recorded what sounds like electrical equipment running and patients screaming. The room retains an electrical charge that has no scientific explanation, and electronic devices frequently malfunction or capture unexplained electromagnetic readings. The hospital's extensive tunnel system, used to transport deceased patients, is so haunted that even experienced paranormal investigators hesitate to explore alone. The tunnels echo with footsteps, voices, and the sound of gurneys being wheeled through corridors that haven't seen use in decades. Taking the number 2 spot is Newsham Park Hospital in Liverpool, a facility with one of the darkest histories in UK medical care. Operating from 1874 to 1997, this institution served multiple purposes: workhouse, orphanage, and psychiatric hospital, each leaving its own layer of suffering and supernatural activity. What makes Newsham Park particularly sinister is its history with children. Thousands of orphans were housed here in deplorable conditions, with many dying from disease, neglect, or suspicious circumstances. The children's cemetery on the grounds contains hundreds of unmarked graves. The hospital later became a psychiatric facility where experimental treatments were common. Patients were subjected to crude lobotomies, prolonged isolation, and treatments that would be considered torture today. The mortality rate was among the highest in the country. The paranormal activity at Newsham Park is overwhelming. The building seems to be a nexus of supernatural energy, with multiple types of hauntings occurring simultaneously. Visitors report seeing full-body apparitions, hearing disembodied voices, and experiencing physical contact from invisible entities. The former children's wards are heartbreaking to explore. Investigators consistently record the sound of children crying, playing, and calling for help. Toys have been found moved overnight, and visitors report seeing small figures running through the corridors. The hospital's morgue is one of the most active paranormal locations in the UK. The room maintains a temperature significantly colder than the rest of the building, and visitors report the overwhelming smell of embalming fluid, even though chemicals haven't been used there in decades. One of the most terrifying phenomena is the phantom surgery that seems to take place in the former operating theaters. Visitors report hearing surgical procedures being performed, complete with the sound of medical equipment and surgeons giving instructions, but the rooms are completely empty. The hospital's isolation cells, where violent patients were confined in solitary confinement, are said to be so haunted that even brief visits cause extreme psychological distress. Multiple visitors have reported hearing scratching sounds on the walls and voices pleading to be released. What sets Newsham Park apart is the intensity and frequency of the paranormal activity. Unlike other haunted locations where encounters are sporadic, Newsham Park provides supernatural experiences to virtually every visitor, making it a magnet for paranormal researchers and thrill seekers alike. And now the moment you've been waiting for. The number 1 most haunted hospital in the UK, Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire. Wait, that's still operational. Let me correct that. The number 1 spot goes to Friern Hospital, also known as Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, in North London. Operating from 1851 to 1993, this was once the largest psychiatric hospital in Europe, housing over 3,000 patients in conditions that can only be described as hellish. Fern Hospital was designed to be a city unto itself, complete with its own gasworks, farm, railway station, and cemetery. What was supposed to be a progressive treatment facility became a warehouse for society's unwanted, where patients were forgotten by their families and often died alone and unmarked. The hospital's treatment methods were barbaric even by Victorian standards. Patients were subjected to ice baths, prolonged restraint, experimental surgeries, and psychological torture disguised as therapy. The mortality rate was staggering, with thousands buried in unmarked graves. The paranormal activity at Friern Hospital is unlike anything documented elsewhere in the UK. The building seems to pulse with supernatural energy, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the suffering of generations of patients. The most haunted area is the former admission ward, where new patients were processed and classified. Visitors report seeing long lines of ghostly figures waiting to be admitted, as if the intake process continues for eternity. The hospital's ballroom, where patients were forced to participate in social activities, is haunted by the sound of orchestral music and the sight of patients dancing with invisible partners. The scene appears joyful until you realize that participation was often involuntary. The restraint rooms and padded cells are so psychically charged that sensitive individuals often become physically ill just by entering them. The walls seem to echo with the screams and pleas of patients who spent months or years in solitary confinement. Perhaps most disturbing is the children's section, where young patients were housed alongside adults in completely inappropriate conditions. Investigators report seeing child-sized figures running through the corridors and hearing the sound of children crying for parents who abandoned them. The hospital's extensive tunnel system, used to transport bodies to the mortuary, is considered one of the most haunted locations in Europe. The tunnels maintain an unnaturally cold temperature and echo with the sound of footsteps, voices, and the rolling of gurney wheels. What makes Friern Hospital the most haunted in the UK is not just the intensity of the activity, but the sheer number of spirits that seem to inhabit the complex. After nearly 150 years of operation and thousands of deaths, the hospital has become a repository of human suffering that refuses to be forgotten. And there you have it, the top 10 most haunted hospitals in the UK that will absolutely keep you awake at night. From the children's cries echoing through empty wards to the phantom surgeries still taking place in abandoned operating theaters, these locations serve as reminders that some places never truly let go of their past. These hospitals represent more than just ghost stories. They're testimonies to a dark period in medical history when society's most vulnerable were hidden away and forgotten. The spirits that linger in these places aren't just seeking attention, they're demanding that their stories be remembered. If you found this countdown as chilling as we did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying content. Have you ever visited any of these haunted hospitals? Share your experiences in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories might just make it into our next video. Which hospital from our list would you be brave enough to spend the night in? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest spine-tingling investigations. Until next time, sleep tight if you can.